Humans stopped being kind and said enough. What came next was war. My name is Vesgeorn. I have 4 hands, 2 hearts, and 11 years of regret sitting in my chest like stones in a bag. I was stationed aboard the human diplomatic vessel called the CSS Patience. That name alone should have told me everything I needed to know. It did not. I was too busy writing reports about weakness. The first time I watched Ambassador Owen Kale offer food at a peace table, I thought it was a cultural custom, something harmless, possibly even a little charming in the way that small, unthreatening gestures sometimes are. He had arranged the bowl himself that morning. I had seen him in the ship's kitchen before the session started, standing over a pot, stirring it slowly, like a man who had nowhere else to be and nothing more pressing to think about. The food smelled like rain and warm earth, and something I had no name for in any of my 3 native languages. I stood in the doorway and watched him stir, and he did not look up, and I left without saying anything, because I did not know what you say to someone doing something so ordinary before something so consequential. He carried the bowl to the table himself. He placed it in front of Supreme Delegate Chorus of the Vreth Dominion with both hands, which in many human traditions signals a certain kind of respect, a deliberateness, a recognition of the person receiving. Chorus looked at it the way you look at something placed in front of you by mistake. His jaw plates moved twice, which in Vreth body language signals mild contempt regardless of dialect. It is one of those gestures that means the same thing across all their regional variations, and I had learned it in my first week stationed in the Confederacy's diplomatic corps. Then he knocked it off the table. The bowl shattered on the white floor. The food spread out in a slow, dark circle. 3 Confederacy observers at the far end of the table flinched. I did not flinch, only because I had trained myself not to in diplomatic settings, and even then it was a near thing. Owen Kale looked at the floor. He stood completely still and looked at the broken bowl and the spreading food, and he looked at it for a long time, the way a person looks at something they expected, and are still not fully ready for when it arrives. Then he crouched down, right there at the peace table, in front of Chorus and the observers, and the room full of species who had come to watch humanity be managed. He picked up the broken pieces with his bare hands. Human hands are softer than ours, and cut more easily, and I watched him handle the sharp edges carefully, collecting them, stacking them in his palm. He stood up. He looked at Chorus. "We will try again tomorrow," he said. And he walked out to dispose of the pieces. He meant it. That was the part I could not understand then, and could not explain in any of my reports for 11 years. He always, completely, without any performance of it, meant it. I had been assigned to study humans. My mandate was to evaluate their threat potential and file quarterly assessments to the Confederacy of 12 Suns. I had been doing this for 11 years, and I had been filing the same essential report in slightly varied language, so it would not look like I was simply copying myself from one quarter to the next. Threat potential, negligible. Species demonstrates excessive tendency to avoid direct conflict. Recommend continued diplomatic pressure, as this species will consistently concede rather than escalate. I wrote that, over and over. 444 reports, 11 years, the same conclusion. I was wrong in every single one. The Vreth Dominion took 2 human colony ships in the Ardennes corridor, 1,600 civilians aboard both vessels. The humans filed a formal diplomatic protest and offered to open reparations negotiations. The Keth Sur Collective seized a human deep space research station in the outer territories, and the 9-member crew did not survive. The humans requested an international tribunal under the Celestine Accords conflict resolution framework. The Dral Collective moved into 3 human border systems one season, absorbed them entirely, renamed the planets, replaced the administrative structures, and began operating schools in which the children born on those worlds were taught a version of history in which those worlds had always been Dral, had never been anything other than Dral, would always be Dral. The humans sent teachers. Let me write that again so it lands with the weight it deserves. The humans sent their own teachers to work in those schools, alongside the Dral curriculum, alongside the people who had taken their worlds and given those worlds different names and were teaching the children born on them a different past. They sent educators, patient ones, who worked quietly beside the colonizers and did not make scenes and did not demand recognition and just made sure some true things were being taught alongside the false ones. I could not put that in my reports. I did not have the framework for it. I wrote non-confrontational response, and moved on to the next incident, and told myself I was being professionally precise. Every species at every table looked at those responses and read the same thing. A species that would absorb anything rather than fight. A species that could be pushed indefinitely and would push back only with paperwork and patience. I looked at those responses and saw something else. Something that made me uncomfortable every time I thought about it clearly, so I stopped thinking about it clearly, which is a failure I will carry for the rest of my career. I saw a species holding itself on a leash, and I could see, if I let myself look, that the leather was cracking. It was not the colony ships that broke things open. It was not the research station crew. It was not even the children learning the wrong names for their own home worlds. It was a Tuesday in the 47th session of that year. It was a child named Clara. She was 7 years old. She died in the Keth Sur reclamation drive in Sector 9, along with 214 other civilians, in a corridor that should have been designated non-combat, under 3 separate sections of the Celestine Accords. She was Owen Cale's daughter, and he found out about it between Agenda Item 4 and Agenda Item 5 of the session. He did not leave the room. He finished the session. He made the proposal scheduled for Agenda Item 5. He took notes during the response period. He said, "We will try again tomorrow." He went to his quarters. The ship logs from that evening show a 6-hour gap. No activity recorded. No communications sent or received. Just a blank in the data that I noticed, and then flagged to no one, and did nothing about. When he emerged, his face was the same face. His voice was the same voice. His hands, which I had watched handle broken ceramic pieces carefully enough not to cut himself, were steady. But his eyes had changed in a quality I spent 3 days trying to name, and could not, until years later, when I sat down with a human dictionary and went through it slowly, until I found the right word. Done. Not exhausted, not defeated, not sad, not angry, not any of the emotional states I had learned to read in human physiognomy. Something cleaner and colder than any of those things. A state of completion. A door that had closed, not because someone slammed it, but because the person on one side of it had simply, finally, stopped reaching for the handle. The next morning, Owen Cale sat across from Choris at the table for the last time. He placed a single document in the center. He did not slide it toward anyone, or gesture at it, or explain its contents before he spoke. "This is our formal withdrawal from the Celestine Accords," he said. "This is our formal withdrawal from the Confederacy's arbitration framework. This is our notification of unilateral strategic restructuring effective immediately." Choris's jaw plates clicked twice. Contempt, same as always. The same signal I had been watching at these tables for 11 years. "And what does that mean for us, exactly?" Choris said. Owen Cale stood up. He straightened his jacket. He picked up nothing from the table because he had brought nothing he intended to keep. He looked at Choris with the eyes I had no old word for, and have since found only one word for. "It means we are done apologizing for what we are about to do," he said. He walked out of the room. I sat there with Choris for a long time. The document sat in the center of the table. Neither of us reached for it. The room had the strange quality of spaces where something important just happened, and the air has not caught up yet with the significance of it. Choris's jaw plates clicked a third time. Still contempt. Still the same reading of the same species that every report in the Confederacy archives had agreed upon. I looked at the door Owen Cale had walked through, and I thought about 11 years of, "We will try again tomorrow," and I thought about Clara, and I thought about the bowl on the first morning, the careful way he had picked up the pieces, and I felt something move through my secondary heart that I did not log and did not report. We did not understand what we had just witnessed end. The galaxy would understand soon enough. The Confederacy's intelligence apparatus on humanity filled 412 bound volumes in the Central Archive. I have read all of them. I have read them twice. I understand now that 412 volumes of meticulous observation produced one mistake. The same mistake, written in slightly different professional language by slightly different analysts, across 30 years of very confident reporting. We watched what the humans showed us, and we believed we were seeing everything. Let me walk through how that error was constructed, because understanding the mechanics of a mistake this size is the only thing that might prevent the next one. Under the Celestine Accords, member species conducted routine mutual inspection protocols. Ships, installations, weapons catalogs, production facilities, all of it open to Confederacy inspection teams on a rotating schedule. The humans participated in every inspection with complete cooperation. Their inspection logs were spotless. They answered every question. They opened every door that was asked to be opened. Their ships were older than the Confederacy average. Their drive systems were measurable and categorized. Their carrier groups moved at speeds that made our tactical planning teams feel comfortable. Comfortable enough to stop paying particularly close attention to the speeds. Their point defense arrays were calibrated for piracy deterrence in their outer territories, not for fleet engagement. Their munitions inventories were conventional, documented, exactly what they said they were. Every inspection confirmed the same picture: a species with a modest, aging, professionally maintained but unremarkable military capacity. Every inspection confirmed it, because the humans had decided, 30 years before I ever boarded the CSS Patience, exactly which ships they wanted the Confederacy to inspect. They flew those ships on every joint exercise, every escort mission where Confederacy sensor arrays would be active, every diplomatic approach route where someone on our side would be quietly cataloging configuration and performance data. They flew those specific vessels at those specific speeds with those specific weapons signatures, consistently, year after year, for 3 decades. It was not deception in any crude sense. Those ships existed. Everything our teams logged was real. The data was accurate. We simply never once questioned whether what was being made available to us represented everything there was. We never asked because the picture was comfortable, and comfortable pictures do not prompt questions. Human economic data, publicly filed with the Confederacy Economic Oversight Bureau, each fiscal cycle, showed 4.2% of gross annual output directed toward military development and maintenance. Below the Confederacy average, our economic analysis teams noted this approvingly in several reports, as evidence of a species that had found equilibrium with its neighbors, and was not engaged in aggressive resource allocation toward military ends. What the filed documents did not contain was a budget category that had existed in classified human records for exactly 200 years, named differently in different administrative eras, maintained through every change of government and ideology, and diplomatic philosophy their complicated political history had produced. The current administration called it the Patience Fund. Previous generations had called it other things, but the essential description, in the internal memos of every administration that had maintained it, was the same. The money set aside for the day the kindness stopped working. 200 years of compound returns on a very specific investment. Every government across their entire species contributed. It survived elections, policy reversals, economic contractions, periods of philosophical isolationism, periods of enthusiastic internationalism. It was the one line item that no administration in 2 centuries had touched, because every administration understood, regardless of everything else they disagreed about, that the fund was not about wanting war. It was about ensuring that if war came to them, they would not face it with nothing. We had read a species that could not afford to escalate. We had been watching a species that had been quietly preparing to make escalation possible for longer than any of us had been in our current posts. The Arathon shipyard region appeared in our navigational databases as a dark matter concentration zone, unstable, navigation hazard. We lost 3 scout vessels attempting to survey the region over 8 years. We flagged the losses as navigation incidents, updated our hazard maps, and routed around it. Standard protocol for a region with that classification. 91 days after Owen Cale walked out of the final session, the zone cleared. Our long-range observation arrays, which maintained passive monitoring on flagged navigation hazard zones as standard background protocol, now had an unobstructed line of sight into the region for the first time in years. The preliminary count that came back to my observation station arrived in 3 separate transmissions. The first 2 were flagged as potential sensor errors by the processing system, which had threshold parameters for plausible fleet concentrations that the incoming data exceeded. My team had to manually override the error flags on the 3rd transmission to get the raw numbers. 14 carrier groups. New design. Not the configuration we had cataloged through 30 years of inspections. Something our technical teams had no existing classification for. The drive signatures alone sent Dr. Horath, my chief technical analyst, into an extended silence that I found more alarming than any words she might have produced. 40 years in drive technology assessment. She looked at the spectral data on her display and said nothing for 38 seconds. I counted them. Those drive signatures are theoretically outside the achievable range of known propulsion physics. she said finally. Theoretically, I repeated. She looked at me with the expression of a person recalibrating a large assumption. The humans appear to have been unaware of that limitation, she said. Flanking each carrier group, destroyer screens, lean profiles, fast. And beside each destroyer formation, something our classification system returned unknown codes on consistently. Something long and dark, angled in ways that suggested the people who designed it had entirely stopped caring about aesthetics, and had focused all their attention on a single engineering question: how much damage can this produce against the widest possible category of target? We ran the count 4 times. 347 warships. My secondary heart did something unpleasant when the final confirmation came through. I sat with the number for a long time before I allowed myself to follow the logic of it to where it went. 347 peace sessions. 347 bowls offered. 347 times someone at a table had made the choice to knock the bowl to the floor. One hull laid down in a hidden shipyard per session. Built over 30 years of peace talks. Built during the exact same period our analysts were filing reports about a species too conflict-averse to present any meaningful strategic concern. This was not a snap decision. This was not a species that had lost its temper. This was a plan that had been running in parallel to every diplomatic gesture for longer than most of the careers of the people who would now have to respond to it. They had been patient, genuinely patient, and simultaneously, every single day of that patience, they had been preparing for the day the patience ran out. I think about what it takes to do both things at once. To sit at a table and mean it when you say, "We will try again tomorrow," and also, on the same day, in a shipyard hidden behind a navigation hazard, continue building the thing you will use when the tomorrows finally stop coming. Most species can do one or the other. Build or hope, prepare for the worst or work toward the best. The humans did both, every day, for 30 years, with a discipline that I am still not sure I fully understand even now. The message they sent was text only. One transmission, broadcast simultaneously on every Confederacy frequency. It arrived at the same second the dark matter zone cleared, which meant they had timed it to the exact moment the fleet became visible, which meant the revelation of the fleet was part of the message and not separate from it. It said, "We forgave everything we could forgive. We have run out of forgiveness. Remove your military assets from our territory and the territories of our civilians, or we will demonstrate, in specific and permanent terms, why we spent 30 years pretending to be something smaller than what we are." We kept count. Those last 3 words. I brought the full message to my analysis team within the hour. I asked them to tell me what "we kept count" referred to. What were they counting? System losses? Civilian casualties? Incident reports filed under the Accords? No one produced a satisfying answer. Every interpretation felt too small to carry the weight those 3 words were clearly designed to carry. It took me 3 more years, and a personal letter from Owen Cale to finally understand what they meant. I will not explain it yet. It belongs where it arrives, when the rest of the story has built the space for it to land in. The Vreth Dominion High Command convened their emergency session within 6 hours of the message reaching their command center. Their deliberation lasted 3 hours and 40 minutes. The final vote was 11-1 in favor of classifying the message as a tactical bluff by a diplomatically failed species with outsized, newly revealed military ambitions. The one dissenting vote was cast by Commander Breck Aral, who had been the commanding officer of the Vreth forces in the Ardennes corridor engagement. He had filed a classified report after that engagement that no one above his rank had read, in which he noted that the human response force had pulled back at a moment when it did not need to, and that the targeting precision of the withdrawal had bothered him more than any aggressive action would have, because it spoke to a level of control that undid several assumptions he had previously held about human military capacity. He cast the one vote. The High Command stripped his rank. 91 hours later, the Vreth Dominion ceased to exist as a political entity. Not 91 days, 91 hours. The analysts who came after spent months trying to work out how a campaign of that scale had been completed in that time frame. The military historians wrote papers about the drive technology, the targeting systems, the logistics of moving 14 carrier groups in coordinated engagement patterns without the communication lag those distances should have produced. They were all studying the right facts and asking the wrong question. The question was not how the humans did it in 91 hours. The question was why 91 hours specifically. 91 days between the message and the fleet's appearance. 91 hours between first engagement and completion. The humans had chosen both numbers deliberately. The Confederacy's cryptography teams took 4 months to decode the significance. It was not a military cipher. 91 was the number of days since Owen Kale had walked out of the final session of the 47th year of peace talks. They had given the galaxy exactly as long as the message had been in the air to make a different choice. And then they had completed the operation in a duration equal to that waiting period, as a precise and deliberate communication. Every step of it was a message. Every number. Every decision about what to hit and what to leave alone. Every hour of the timeline. They were not fighting a war. They were delivering a lesson they had written the curriculum for in advance. Here is the thing that no report in the first 2 years after the Vreth campaign captured correctly. They stopped the moment the lesson was complete. Not when they ran out of targets. Not when the Confederacy deployed a sufficient counterforce to make continuing too costly. Not when political pressure from neutral member species reached a threshold. When the lesson was complete. When the specific military infrastructure that had been used against human civilians and territory had been addressed with the precision they had planned for. At that exact point, and not one engagement past it, the human fleet held position. And then they sent engineers, civilian vessels, carrying repair equipment, agricultural restoration supplies, water processing components, medical materiel, arriving in the outer settlements before the Confederacy had even agreed on what to call what had happened, arriving without announcement, without requested permission, without any of the frameworks that normally accompany this kind of operation. They just arrived, and they started fixing things. A Vreth engineer named Selen, who was working in one of the outer settlement processing facilities, told me, when I interviewed her 2 years later, that she had come out of her facility at dawn on the 3rd day after the campaign ended, and found 3 humans outside repairing the water intake system that had been damaged by a pressure wave from a strike on a nearby military depot. She had stood in the door for a while watching them work. Finally, she had asked the nearest one, a woman with dark red dust on her hands and a very practical, unpretentious way of moving through her tasks, what they were doing there. The woman had looked up. "The intake was broken," she said. "We fix broken intakes." She went back to work. Selen told me she went back inside and sat down on the floor of her facility and did not move for a long time. Not because she was afraid, because she was trying to understand something about the nature of a species that could do what had been done in 91 hours and then arrive 3 days later to fix water intakes, not as a strategy, not as a gesture of dominance, because the intake was broken, and broken things should be fixed. They were not showing us they were powerful, Selen told me. They had already shown us that. They were showing us something else. I did not have a word for it in my language. I still do not. I understood what she meant. Neither do I. Not exactly. But I have spent 20 years trying to find the right words for it, and the closest I have come is this. They were showing us what they actually valued. Not the campaign. Not the fleet. Not the capability that had ended a political entity in 91 hours. Those were means, tools, things built and used and then put down. What they valued was the water intake, the broken thing made whole, the work that needed doing, done. They had always valued that. We had just never been paying attention to the right things. The emergency session of the Confederacy Council of Species opened before the sun was up over the Capitol. I was present as a senior diplomatic observer. I had not slept. Looking around the chamber, I could tell that most of the other representatives had not slept either, and the collective exhaustion gave the room a raw, stripped quality, like a building after its outer walls have been removed, and the internal structure is exposed for the first time. 15 species, 41 senior representatives, 1 item on the agenda, though the agenda itself was simply a blank page with a date at the top, because no one had managed to produce official language for what was happening. Fleet Commander Hethrax of the Keth Sur stood at the presentation position. He was old, decorated. He had a long career of being correct in military assessments, which was the only thing that had kept him in his position long enough to have to stand in front of this particular room with this particular set of numbers. He walked through the data methodically, the Vreth campaign outcomes, the weapons performance analyses, the fleet composition at Arathon, the current positioning of human forces, which had not advanced from their last engagement coordinates, but had also made no movement toward withdrawal, which put them in optimal range of 17 different high-value Confederacy targets simultaneously, as if positioned there, not by accident, but by prior planning, with knowledge of exactly where those 17 targets were. Combined Confederacy fleet strength outweighs the human force by a ratio of approximately 40-1, he said. Those are the raw numbers. I want to be transparent that those numbers are what they are. The room was quiet. The kind of quiet that is not the absence of noise, so much as the presence of 41 species representatives, all doing the same calculation in their own heads simultaneously. They knew that, said Delegate Voreen of the Palacian Reach. She said it without looking up from the documents in front of her, in the mild, precise tone of someone stating a fact that is so obvious it should not require stating, but apparently does. They knew the ratio when they built the fleet. They knew it when they positioned it. They knew it when they sent the initial message. They have known the exact Confederacy fleet strength for years, because those numbers are public record under the mutual transparency protocols they participated in. Your point, Delegate? Said Hethrax. She looked up. Her species have very large, very still eyes that do not perform emotion the way mammalian faces do. But something in the quality of her stillness in that moment made the chamber feel half its size. My point, she said, is that the mathematics you are presenting to us as the reason we should have confidence are the same mathematics they used to decide to move anyway, which means there is a different set of mathematics, a calculation we are not doing, that they did, that produces a conclusion different from the one our numbers suggest. I leaned forward. All the things I had not put in my reports for 11 years were fully assembled in my mind at once, clear in a way they had not been while I was actively refusing to look at them. They were not trying to win a numbers engagement, I said. The heads turned toward me, and I kept going, because stopping would mean going back to not saying it. They built for a different calculation entirely. The question they were answering was not, can we win against 40-1 odds? The question was, can we make defeating us cost more than any member of this council is willing to pay? Those are entirely different engineering problems. 40-1 fleet superiority means very little if engaging that fleet costs 40 fleets, and every shipyard, and every population center that supported them. They did not need to be able to win. They needed to be able to make winning against them ruinous. They appear to have solved that problem. The silence that followed was the longest professional silence I had sat through in 30 years of diplomatic service. Hethrax looked at me for a long time, with the expression of a commander identifying a variable he had left out of a calculation. How long have they been building to that specific capacity? He asked. 200 years, I said. After that, no one in the room said anything for a while. What came out of that session was not a decision to engage the human fleet. Hethrax was many things, but he was not a person who spent lives proving mathematics he had stopped believing in. What came out of it was a working group, an unofficial communication channel open to the human diplomatic mission, and a temporary stand-down order for all Confederacy fleet elements within human territorial proximity. The human response arrived in 4 hours, addressed to me by name. Owen Kale wrote, Veskeorn, I know what your actual assessments were over the years, as opposed to what you filed. I know you opposed the Dominion's posture. I know you were overruled, and I know what that costs a person over time. I am not writing to offer something transactional. I am writing because you have been honest, in the ways available to you, and you deserve honesty in return. We are not here to build an empire. Conquest requires extensive administrative infrastructure, and we find bureaucracy genuinely exhausting. What we are going to do is dismantle every military installation that has been positioned against human civilians, remove every asset that was used in operations against our people, and then go home. What you rebuild after that is entirely your business. But understand this, we have complete documentation of where everything is. We have had it for years. We will know immediately if any of it is rebuilt in a form that presents the same concerns. The next conversation will not begin with food on a table. At the bottom, below his name, I am sorry about the research team on the Herath station, the ones who were obstructing the reclamation drive from inside the system. We know about them. We kept count. I read that final line repeatedly. And then, sitting alone in my observation office at the 3rd hour of the morning, with the stars outside the porthole and the hum of the ship's systems around me, I understood for the first time what the count was. Not military assets, not territorial incidents, not diplomatic sessions or filed protests, or positions captured or systems renamed. They had been keeping a list of the people on the other side of every conflict, who had tried to do the right thing, and paid for it. The dissenters. The ones who voted against. The researchers on Herath Station who had tried to slow the reclamation from within, and whom no one in the Confederacy had formally acknowledged, because acknowledging them would have meant acknowledging what they had been trying to stop. Commander Breckerall, who had cast the one vote and had his rank stripped within the hour. Every person, in every species, across 30 years of conflict, who had chosen decency and lost something for it. The humans had kept their names. They had kept their stories. They had kept that count with the same care they kept everything else, and they were telling us now that they had kept it, without making demands about it, without converting it into leverage, without doing anything at all except letting us know that those people had not been invisible. They had been seen, by the species on the other side of the table, by the people who had every reason to be focused entirely on their own losses, and had somehow found the capacity to also notice and remember the strangers on the opposite side, who had tried to be decent. I sat with that for a very long time. The cost of kindness is what they called the full ledger when they published it, 2 years after active operations concluded. 347 incidents. For each one, what was done, and what the humans chose not to do in response. Column 2 was longer than Column 1 in every entry. The authorized responses that were stood down. The operations assembled and then cancelled. The retaliations prepared and shelved. 30 years of accumulated restraint, documented with the same precision they brought to everything else. When the Keth-Sur Academy of Strategic Sciences received the document, they suspended their standard curriculum for 6 months. They called it an epistemological review. What they meant was that the foundational assumption of their entire field, the assumption that restraint indicates inability, had just been comprehensively destroyed by the most expensive possible counterexample, and they did not yet know how to rebuild around its absence. The Battle of the Cerulean Gate is what finally broke the Confederacy's operational confidence, though broke is the wrong word for what happened there because nothing was destroyed at the gate. Nothing at all. The combined Confederacy First Fleet was 47 vessels, the pride of 9 member species. It had not suffered a formal engagement loss in the documented history of the Confederacy's military operations. It was not an old fleet, or an under-maintained one, or one assembled hastily from second-line ships. It was the best the Confederacy had, and it was sent to the gate as the statement the Confederacy needed to make about its capacity to respond. 7 human destroyers held the gate. 11 minutes. 3 Confederacy ships returned to their home ports. The other 44 were still at the gate when the rescue teams arrived, and this is the part that the military historians keep focusing on in all the wrong ways. The 44 ships were intact. Not destroyed, not scuttled. Disabled with a degree of targeting precision that the engineering teams who disassembled the damaged systems spent 8 months attempting to reverse engineer. By the end of that period, they had a partial technical understanding and a complete tactical understanding. The humans had developed those targeting systems specifically to do what they did at the Cerulean Gate, to fight a full fleet engagement and produce no fatalities on either side. Every shot placed with knowledge of where crew compartments were located. Every system that controlled life support, emergency power, crew evacuation, and environmental stability left completely untouched. Only the drive systems, weapons arrays, and communication equipment had been disabled. The crews of 44 ships sat in their intact vessels at the gate and received a message on the emergency crew frequency. Not the command channel, the personal emergency frequency that routes directly to individual crew members and cannot be filtered at the command level. Your crews are alive. Come and get them. We are not at war with people. We are at war with the decisions of the people who sent you here. Go home. The families of those crew members received the same message simultaneously, routed through personal communication channels whose access should not have been possible for an opposing military force in a combat environment. When the final tally was confirmed showing 0 fatalities across a full engagement between 47 Confederacy vessels and 7 human destroyers, the council chamber went a kind of quiet that I had never heard in a political space before, and have not heard since. Not because of what it revealed about human military capability, because of what it revealed about the hand holding that capability. To fight with that level of precision required more than technology. It required a clarity of intention that most forces lose in the first exchange of fire. It required people who were capable, at the peak of operational pressure, of holding, "We can destroy this, and we will not," simultaneously, and acting on both at once, without confusion, without slippage, without the chaos of combat, making the distinction disappear. You could train for that. You could build systems to support it. But underneath all the training and technology, there had to be something older, something that had been sitting behind warm eyes at peace tables and carried bowls in both hands and picked up broken ceramic with soft fingers and said, "We will try again tomorrow," for 30 years. That quality had not appeared at the gate. It had always been there. The gate was just the first time anyone who was not paying close attention could not miss it. Fleet Commander Hethrax submitted his formal assessment to the Council the following morning. He recommended immediate and unconditional opening of framework negotiations. He did not dress the recommendation in strategic language. He wrote it plainly, in the direct voice of a military officer who has looked at a situation and concluded that the honest thing is the only remaining useful thing. He submitted it. He accepted the Council's response. And then he retired, quietly, to the countryside estate he had been putting off retiring to for 15 years. And I do not believe he ever commented publicly on any of it again. I think he was done too. In the same way Owen Cale had been done, though the things they were done with were very different. Owen Cale agreed to meet me 3 days after the gate. He chose a small room near the ship's kitchen. He was drinking something warm, and he looked like a man who had finished a very large and very long project, and was sitting with the strange lightness that sometimes follows completion. I asked him the question I had been carrying for 20 years. "When did you know?" I said. "Know what?" "Specifically," he said. "That it would end this way." He was quiet. Outside the porthole, the stars moved at the slow drift that comes with standard orbit, and the kitchen down the corridor was already starting its morning preparations. The faint sounds of equipment, and someone moving around in the early light. "We always knew it might," he said. "That is why we built what we built. We hoped it would not have to be used. The hope was real. Every bowl was real. Every tomorrow was real. We were not performing patience. We were patient. And patient is not the same thing as permanent." He looked at his cup. "We hoped until we ran out of hope," he said. "And then we used what we had built. And then we stopped. And now we are going to try to fix what we broke in the process of fixing what was broken before we got there. Because it needs doing." He stood up and moved toward the door, and then stopped with one hand on the frame. "The food tomorrow will be the same recipe," he said, "in case you were wondering." He left. I sat in that small room for a long time. I thought about a bowl on a white floor, and a man who crouched down to pick up the pieces and said, "We will try again tomorrow," and meant it every single time. I had spent 11 years watching that, and calling it weakness. I had been watching something that had no name in any of my 3 languages, and I had been too comfortable with a wrong name to go looking for the right one. I spent the next decade trying to find it. The new Celestine Accords took 4 years and 2 months to negotiate in full. 15 species sent senior delegations. The meeting room on the CSS Second Chance was designed to seat everyone at the same level. No raised positions, no hierarchical spacing, just a large table, with enough room for every species representatives to be comfortable, and enough distance between delegations that no one felt crowded. Owen Cale had overseen the room design himself. I thought that was the kind of detail that was probably more important than it looked. The humans came to the table with their terms already written. They had not developed them in response to the negotiations. They had not emerged from the preceding months of discussion. They had been written, I later learned, during the same period the fleet was being positioned, before the first engagement, before the Vreth campaign, before the gate. They had always known what they wanted from the outcome. 3 things: a civilian protection framework with binding enforcement mechanisms and automatic sanctions for any member species that violated it. Not the advisory language of the original Celestine Accords, which had produced 347 documented violations with 0 binding consequences. Actual enforcement, with teeth, with automatic activation that did not require political consensus to trigger, because political consensus had consistently failed to trigger when it was most needed. Mandatory inclusion of the full cost of kindness document in the standard curriculum of every military academy across all Confederacy member species. Not as an optional supplementary text, as a required foundational reading for anyone entering strategic studies or military command training. The logic was not punitive. The logic was that the failure that led to 30 years of escalating violations was fundamentally an educational failure. A failure to understand what patience actually looks like, what restraint actually costs, what a species holding back actually means, as distinct from a species incapable of action. The curriculum change was designed to ensure that no future military strategist would make the same category error that 412 volumes of professional analysis had made. An open and permanent humanitarian assistance framework. Any species experiencing internal civilian crisis could request human support. No conditions attached. No debt accrued. No political leverage held over the species requesting help. Assistance given because the situation required it, not because it was advantageous. That third term produced the most debate. Not opposition exactly, but confusion. Multiple delegations asked, in various forms, the same question. What do you get from this? Owen Cale's answer was the same every time, delivered in the same patient, direct way. People get helped, he said. That is what we get. The delegations kept looking for the other layer, the strategic calculation underneath, the exchange rate being hidden somewhere in the language. There was not one. Or rather, the exchange rate was exactly what he said it was. He had built a career trying to explain to people that the exchange rate was exactly what he said it was, and most of them had spent the whole time looking behind his words for the smarter version. There was not a smarter version. One additional item, placed at the end of the formal terms list, not as a demand, but as a statement of policy going forward. Human diplomatic missions will continue to offer food at peace tables. The food will not be knocked to the floor. Delegate Haroun signed without negotiation. She had replaced Choris after the Commonwealth transition. She had read the cost of kindness document 3 full times. She had attended the first restatement day in the outer settlements and stood in the square for 4 hours and 20 minutes while the names were read. I know this because I attended that same restatement day and I saw her standing in the crowd. She did not draw attention to herself. She stood in the cold morning air with the other people in the square, her formal robes replaced with something plain and practical for the weather, and she listened while the reader went through the list in a steady voice that did not falter at any point in the 4 hours and 20 minutes. After the signing, she asked Owen Cale if she could have the recipe for the food they served at the table. She asked it quietly, like someone asking for something they are not certain they have a right to. He gave it to her immediately. No negotiation, no conditions. He simply gave her the recipe. Of course he did. The Vreth Commonwealth built its new political structure over the following 6 years, with an amount of internal debate, public argument, legislative gridlock, reversal, re-argument, and eventual compromise, that the humans told me privately, was a completely healthy sign. Their constitution went through 11 drafts. 2 of the drafts were rejected by public referendum. The third referendum produced a result close enough that they ran it again. The resulting system was messy, loud, imperfect, and genuinely representative of the different populations it served. They have a public holiday now, on the anniversary of the end of the campaign. They call it Restatement Day. Every city, every settlement, a public reading of the names, the human civilian names, from every incident in the 30-year ledger, the colony ships, the research station crew, Sector 9, all of them. The full list in every location takes between 3 hours 40 minutes and 4 hours 30 minutes. Depending on the size of the public space and the pace of the reader. The readings are not required by law. No one is compelled to attend. The squares fill anyway, every year, in every city, with people who choose to stand in whatever weather the day brings and listen to the full list. Not because of fear. The fear was there in the early years, the memory of what 91 hours meant, and I will not pretend otherwise. But fear is not what fills those squares in year 17 and year 18 and year 20. Something else fills them, something that took longer to arrive and is more durable once it gets there. Choris died 4 years into the Commonwealth period. Old age, in his home city, with whatever comfort his former rank still afforded him. He had not participated in the post-conflict reconciliation processes. He had declined all interview requests from historians and archivists. He had not attended the first or any subsequent restatement day. As far as anyone can determine, he did not at any point between the conference table and his final breath understand what had been placed in front of him 30 years of Tuesdays in a row. What it was. What it cost the person who placed it there. What it meant every time he knocked it to the floor. I think about Choris more than is probably professionally healthy. I think about all the ways a person can be standing directly in front of something being offered to them, something real and costly and freely given, and look at it and see only the opportunity to demonstrate that they do not need it. The ledger, The Cost of Kindness, was published by the human government 2 years after the end of active operations. They did not hold a ceremony for it. They did not issue it with political commentary or framing, or guidance on how it should be interpreted. They published it in full, in every Confederacy language, and left it to be read. I have read it many times. Each reading produces something different, because what I notice changes as I change, and I have changed considerably over the course of reading it. The first time I read it, I focused on column 1, the incidents, the scale, the accumulation of damage over 30 years of documented violations. The second time I read it, I focused on column 2, the responses authorized and stood down, the operations built and canceled, the retaliations prepared and shelved. I read column 2 for a long time and thought about what it costs a person and a species to hold that much capacity in check that many times across that span of time. What it costs in the people who prepared the operations and stood them down. What it costs in the leadership that made those calls. What it costs in the ordinary person who was hurt in the original incident and was told, "We are not going to respond to this," and had to find a way to live with that answer. Restraint has a cost. We never put that in any of our assessments. We treated it as the absence of action, rather than as a specific and costly action in itself. We were wrong, in a way that produced consequences we will be working through for generations. The third time I read the ledger, I focused on something I had not noticed before, a small thing, an appendix, not formally labeled, placed at the end after the main documentation. It was a list of names, not human names, every species represented. People from across the Confederacy, 30 years of names, collected apparently without any of those named individuals knowing, without any announcement, without any official recording or acknowledgement from the Confederacy side. People who had tried to stop things, voted against, obstructed from within, filed the report that no one read, cast the one vote, stood in the doorway of a facility and asked a question that had no comfortable answer. Commander Breckerall was on the list. The Herath Station research team was on the list. There were 409 names. 409 people across 30 years, and 15 species who had tried, in whatever way was available to them, with whatever they had at hand, to do something decent in the middle of situations that made decency expensive. The humans had kept every single name. They had kept them without being asked, without any expectation of return, without knowing if any of those people would ever learn that their names had been kept. I think this is the thing about them that I am still, after 20 years of trying, not fully able to articulate. Not the ships, not the targeting systems, not the 91 hours or the precision or the engineering of the drive systems that our chief analyst still maintains are theoretically impossible and yet are documented fact. The 409 names. The attention to the people on the other side who tried to be decent. The keeping of that record with no strategic purpose, no leverage, no conversion into any form of advantage, just a record. These people existed. They tried. They paid something for it. They should not be forgotten. That is the thing I cannot fully find words for. That is the thing I keep coming back to. That is, I think, the actual cost of their kindness, not the holding back of military responses. Those were the tactical expressions of something deeper. The actual cost was the maintaining of the belief, through 30 years of evidence against it, that on the other side of every conflict, there were still people worth keeping track of, people worth the attention, people whose decency mattered, even when it failed to change the outcome. And that belief is what made the bowls possible. That belief is what made the "we will try again tomorrow" real every single time he said it. And that belief is also what made the reckoning precise, instead of total, when the tomorrows finally ran out. They knew who was trying. They kept count of the people who tried. When the war came, they did not fight a species. They fought the decisions. And they kept the people who had opposed those decisions in an appendix, unnamed in public, unannounced, just held. 409 names. I am number 41 on that list. I found out 3 years ago, when Owen Cale told me in passing, in the same direct and unornamented way he says most things, during a conversation about something else entirely. I did not know what to say. He looked at me with a small expression that on a human face means something like, "Of course you are on the list. You never wrote what you actually saw," he said. "But you also never wrote anything that was actively untrue. You left space in the reports. Anyone looking carefully could see the shape of what you were not saying. He picked up his cup. We noticed. I have thought about that conversation many times since. I left space in the reports. I did not have the courage to write what I actually saw. I wrote around it. I left the edges of the thing visible without naming the thing itself. It was not enough. It was nowhere near enough. But it was something. And someone on the other side of the table, across 11 years of peace sessions and broken bowls and "we will try again tomorrow," noticed the shape of the silence and kept my name. I do not know what to do with that. I am not sure I ever will. But I think it is important. I think it is. In some way I am still working out. The most important thing in this whole account. Not the fleet. Not the gate. Not the 91 hours. The noticing. The careful, sustained, costly noticing of who on the other side was trying to be decent. That is the thing they built that no one counted. That is the thing that was never in any intelligence assessment in 412 volumes. That is the thing I should have written down. 20 years. I am sitting in the diplomatic quarters of the CSS Second Chance, which the humans named without irony or performance. Just the direct and honest statement of what they thought this ship was for. The name is a choice, and every choice they make is a statement, and they are remarkably consistent about meaning what they say. On my desk there is a bowl of food. Owen Kale sent it ahead through the provisioning staff. Same recipe. Same smell that still has no name in any of my languages, something between rain and warm soil and something older than both. I have been sitting with it for an hour without eating it. I am old now. My secondary hearts give me trouble when the temperature drops too fast. My translation implant has developed a lag I keep telling myself I will have serviced and have not yet gotten around to. I walk more carefully than I used to, and I carry more weight in my chest that is not cardiovascular. Tomorrow there will be a summit. The first one under the new accords. 15 species, the same 15 that were in the room during the emergency session 20 years ago, though almost none of the same individuals, because 20 years moves through institutions the way rivers move through landscapes. The geography is transformed, even when the names on the maps stay the same. There will be food on the table. No one will knock it to the floor. I want to be honest about why. In the early years after the conflict, when the new accords were first being implemented, and the memory of the gate was still present in every room where decisions were being made, the food stayed on the table because the memory was in the room. Because no one in the room wanted to be the species that had to have what 91 hours meant explained to them. That is not what keeps the food on the table now. What keeps it on the table now is something that took longer to arrive, and is, I believe, more durable. A genuine understanding, not complete, not in every individual in every delegation, but present, growing, becoming part of how these rooms work, of what the bowl actually is. It is not a gesture of weakness. It was never a gesture of weakness. It is a statement of intention, renewed every time, costly every time, freely given every time. We are still here. We still think this is worth attempting. We still believe you are worth the effort of showing up. Every bowl is a choice, made by a species that also built 347 warships in a hidden shipyard, and kept an exact accounting of every person on every side who tried to do what was right. Both things are entirely true. The fleet and the bowl. The precision of the gate and the water intake in the outer settlement being fixed before dawn on the third day. The 91 hours and the 4 hours and 20 minutes of names being read in public squares every year. Those are not contradictions. They are the same thing, expressed in different circumstances. The kindness was never separate from the strength. The strength was never separate from the kindness. They come from the same place in people who have decided what they actually value, and they express themselves in whatever form the moment requires. That was the thing we never understood. That was the thing we kept misreading as weakness every time we saw it. I pick up the bowl. It is warm against my 4 hands. I eat slowly in the quiet of the ship's evening, alone with the stars outside the porthole, and the faint sounds of the second chance making its way through space toward tomorrow. And I think about all of it, the whole long shape of it, the things I saw, and the things I failed to record, and the things I understand now, that I was too comfortable to understand then. I filed my final intelligence assessment 3 days ago, my last one after 31 years. I wrote it very carefully. Threat potential, variable, and entirely dependent on how you treat them. Do not mistake patience for passivity. Do not mistake restraint for incapacity. Do not mistake kindness for an absence of what lies behind it. Most critically, Do not mistake an empty bowl for an ending. It is always a beginning, until the day you decide to make it otherwise. I finish the food. I set the bowl down on the desk and look at it for a moment. Outside, the stars are the same stars they have always been. Unhurried, completely indifferent to the long, complicated, costly, and occasionally redemptive business of species trying to understand each other, across tables with food on them. Tomorrow we try again. I mean it. I always mean it now. I learned it from the person who meant it when everything in the universe gave him reason not to. The bowl goes back to the kitchen. The summit begins at dawn. We keep trying.